The mirror had been monitoring her for years. Aiza did not understand how she knew. It was a feeling, a cold certainty that tickled the back of her neck whenever she walked past it in the darkened hallway. Its face appeared to be alive, stirring slightly even when there was no wind. Tonight, during the tempest outside pounding against the aged windows of their decaying family mansion, the whispers started. Initially, they were soft, barely distinguishable from the sorrowful cry of the wind. But then came the words, plain, measured, and clearly aimed at her. "Aiza, come closer." Her breath caught. She stood stock still, her hand wrapped around the candlestick so hard its wax dripped onto her shaking fingers. The flame danced crazily, sending macabre shadows dancing across the walls. Her own reflection gazed back at her, wide-eyed and pale. But something was off. It wasn't moving quite correctly, as if it weren't hers anymore. She blinked, shaking her head. This was not happening. Mirrors did not speak. They did not whisper or call out to individuals. But there it was again. The voice, low and gravelly, like stone scratching against stone. "Come closer, child. I have waited so long." Aiza's heart pounded in her chest. She ached to turn away, to dash up the stairs and crawl under the bedclothes until morning came. But her feet would not listen. Rather, they guided her forward, inch by heart-breaking inch, until her nose nearly rested against cold glass. And that's when she noticed it. A shadowy figure standing behind her in the reflection. It wasn't one of her siblings. None of them were tall enough or thin enough to fit its gaunt silhouette. Its hollow eyes glowed with a faint light, like embers smoldering in the darkness. Before she could scream, the figure thrust a skeletal hand against the inside of the mirror, as if attempting to break through. With a gasp, Aiza stumbled backward, dropping the candle. Wax splattered across the floorboards, extinguishing the flame and plunging the hallway into darkness. For a moment, all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat and the relentless drumming of rain against the roof. Then, faintly, the whispers returned. "You cannot escape me, Aiza. You belong to the shadows now." The village of Karagund was nestled deep in the serrated grasp of the Black Mountains, a region where sunlight hardly dared to venture. For centuries, it had been spoken of in hushed whispers, a land cursed where time itself was heavy, like molasses seeping through cracked stone. Legends told of an ancient relic buried under the village square, a relic said to possess unspeakable power. Some said it was a fragment of the underworld, others that it was a doorway to places beyond human understanding. Whatever it was, it had only brought sorrow to those who lived here. This evening, the air was heavy with foreboding, as if the atmosphere itself bore the burden of centuries gone by. Rain pounded against the twisted wooden shutters of the ancient dwelling, and thunder boomed overhead like the roar of some hideous creature. Within, the smell of damp wood and mildew blended with the faint acrid scent of smoldering herbs, a desperate bid by Salma, the eldest of the siblings, to keep at bay whatever evil hovered close. The house itself was a maze of creaking floorboards and musty corridors, its former grandeur worn down to dust through decades of abandonment. Portraits of long-forgotten ancestors adorned the walls, their painted eyes following anyone foolish enough to step too close. Cobwebs hung like mortuary veils over chandeliers that had not seen the light of day for years, and the furniture was shrouded in sheets of dust, the impression of ghostly forms huddled in quiet vigil. It was in this stifling atmosphere that Aiza and her siblings were trapped, unable, or at least unwilling, to escape. Each of them carried the emotional scars of existing in such a haunted environment, but none of them spoke of it aloud. Fear, as it happened, was contagious, and to say it out loud might attract something considerably worse than paranoid imagination. Aiza was not alone in this horror. Her brothers, Imam and Aqib, were standing guard at the front door, their faces stern in the dim light of the lanterns. Both men were wide-shouldered and strong-jawed, the sort of individuals who gave other people confidence. But tonight, even they seemed nervous, their hands resting near the knives that were buckled around their waists. Fahim paced anxiously in the corner, mumbling prayers under his breath. The youngest of the group, not even 20 yet, he had a tangled head of black hair and a fretful look about him. Youthful though he was, however, he had an unnatural talent for feeling danger lurking, and it was all too often that he was the first to sound the alarm, and the last to sleep well. Hisham, the family scholar, studied late into the night, poring over old books scavenged from the attic. His glasses sat tipped upon the bridge of his nose, his sleeves rolled up to show ink-stained forearms. Hisham was a quiet, reserved man, but his mind was a storm of theories and hypotheses, each more disturbing than the last. Mubashir, the perpetually skeptical one, stood arms crossed against the wall, snickering at what he termed superstition. Taller and lankier than his siblings, with a narrow face and sharp features and an ever-present sneer, Mubashir liked to think of himself as the voice of reason in their family. Even he couldn't help but sense, however, the tension hanging in the air like a blanket. Sufyan, the most reserved of them all, sat cross-legged on the ground, drawing odd symbols on pieces of paper. Nobody was quite sure what these symbols were supposed to mean, but Sufyan swore they were protective wards, drawn from pieces of lost lore. Whether or not they did anything was to be determined. In another room, Huda cared for Javaria, whose feverish delirium had worsened since sunset. Huda, the kindest of the siblings, hummed softly as she wiped Javaria's forehead with a wet cloth. Her calm exterior, however, was belied by a sadness in her eyes, a lingering grief that no care could dispel. And Salma, their matriarch, moved between rooms, her eyes flicking toward each shadow as if waiting for something, or someone, to come out of the dark. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a tight bun and her posture straight as a rod, Salma radiated an air of authority flavored with exhaustion. She had shouldered the responsibility of taking care of her younger siblings after their parents' sudden disappearance, and the cost it had extracted from her was clear in the deep lines carved into her face. They were stuck together in this crumbling mansion, tied by blood and terror, each harboring secrets they did not dare utter. "Aiza!" Imam barked loudly, jerking her attention away from the mirror. "What are you doing? Move away from that thing!" She spun around slowly, her voice a mere whisper. "It's calling me." Mubashir snorted. "Calling you? Don't be stupid, it's glass." "It's not just glass," Aiza snapped, startling even herself with the venom in her voice. "You think I don't know what I'm hearing? You think I want this?" Hisham set his book aside, scowling. "Perhaps we should hear her out. There's something not right about that mirror." "Not right?" Mubashir glared at him in disgust. "Oh, please. Next you'll be telling me ghosts are real." No one got a chance to answer, though, before the door slammed open upstairs. Glass shattering could be heard echoing throughout the house. Everyone stood stock still, hearts racing. The sound hadn't originated from the mirror. It had come from upstairs. "What was that?" Huda stuttered. No one answered. Instead, they exchanged uneasy glances before Imam grabbed a lantern and motioned for the others to follow. One by one, they ascended the creaking staircase, their footsteps hesitant and heavy with dread. As they entered the second floor, they discovered the source of the sound, a broken window in the study. There were pieces of glass all over the floor, glinting menacingly under the moonlight that filtered in through the shattered glass. But what really sent shivers down their spines was the writing on the wall in jagged red letters. "They are coming." Imam moved forward, his teeth set. "Who's coming?" As if in answer, the temperature dropped. Their breaths became icy clouds, and the shadows on the walls appeared to stretch and contort abnormally. From below, the distant sound of laughter drifted up, a high, childlike cackle that ran shivers down their backs. "That's impossible," Fahim grumbled, holding his prayer beads more tightly. "There's no one else here." Then, unexpectedly, the downstairs mirror emitted a ear-splitting crack, so loud that it rattled the house. They both came hurrying to the railing and leaned over to stare into the dimly lit foyer below. The mirror swayed drunkenly, its surface broken but remaining whole. In its depths, two glittering red eyes flickered open. "Aiza." The voice sounded once more, louder than before, ringing through the house as a funeral knell. "Come closer." And then, the unthinkable occurred. The mirror started bleeding. Thick black liquid oozed from the fissures, forming puddles on the ground and spreading menacingly towards the stairs. "What do we do?" Huda screamed, alarm creeping into her tone. But Aiza was not listening. Against every urge telling her to flee, she moved a step closer, irresistibly drawn to the evil artifact. "Aiza, stop!" Imam cried out, grabbing for her arm, but she slid out of his reach, going down the stairs in a daze. Behind her, the rest of them stared in terror as the bleeding mirror throbbed with evil energy. And then, from its depths, a hand reached out, a bony, clawed appendage that flailed blindly through the air. The hand drew itself a little further from the mirror, then another, then an arm, and at last a torso. The monster was nothing like anything they'd ever seen before. Its flesh stretched tightly around bulging bones, its lips wide open in a horrific smile full of hooked teeth. Its eyes fastened on Aiza, who crouched, immobile, at the foot of the staircase. "Aiza, go!" Imam shouted, but his voice was muffled, overridden by the thumping of her own heartbeat. The beast lunged, its claws mere inches from her face. The beast darted forward, its claws millimeters from Aiza's nose. But before it could land the blow, an ear-splitting crash shook the house. The chandelier that hung over the foyer wildly pendulumed back and forth, showering marble with splintered glass in its wake. Amidst the commotion, Imam sprang forward, pouncing on Aiza out of danger just in time, as the beast's claw scraped her shoulder, ripping at fabric, but going wide of her skin. "Good God, what in the world is that thing?" Mubashir yelled from the stairs, his characteristic doubt giving way to pure fear. His voice broke with terror, and for once, no one laughed at him about it. The monster stepped back, briefly startled by the crashing debris. Its incandescent red eyes scanned the room, fixed on the terrified siblings cowering together like trapped animals. It emitted a low, rasping growl before retreating into the gory mirror. With one last, spine-tingling shriek, the glass churned savagely and stilled. For a few suspenseful seconds, there was nothing but silence. The only sound was rain beating against the windows, puncturing the unholy quiet. The group stood still, their shallow, ragged breaths held as if to move would summon the beast once more. At last, Salma moved forward, her face pale but determined. "We have to get out. Now." "Leave?" Fahim stuttered, holding his prayer beads so hard they bit into his palms. "Where do we go? Out there." He waved his hand toward the storm-battered night outside the windows. "That thing emerged from this house. It knows us. If we leave, it'll follow." "He's right," Hisham broke in, his voice shaking but unyielding. "This isn't some random attack. Whatever that thing is, it's connected to this place, to us." Aiza huddled on the ground, hands against her temples as if to shut out the residual whispers within her head. Her shoulder hurt where the monster had brushed past her, yet strangely no blood appeared there, only an icy numbness creeping over her skin. She gazed at her siblings, her eyes wide with fear and resolve. "It's coming for me," she breathed. "It's calling my name, repeatedly. I have no idea why, but it's pursuing me." As the first shock started to fade, The stifling ambiance of the house came back with a vengeance. The air seemed thicker now, as if the walls themselves were moving in. Shadows played on the periphery of the wavering lantern light, contorting into forms that were almost human before vanishing into thin air. Each groan of the ancient wooden beams was like footsteps, each gust of wind like a mournful cry. The siblings sat in the upstairs study, the same room in which they had discovered the sinister message written in red letters. "They are coming." None of them wanted to believe it, but all of them felt safer far from the evil mirror in the downstairs room. Even here, however, there was a sense of foreboding. The broken window allowed cold air in that caused the candles to gutter and expire, so they huddled around one oil lamp. Huda cared for Aiza's wound, or lack thereof, with shaking fingers. Even though there was no blood, the space around the rip in Aiza's shirt was abnormally cold, and the skin underneath was speckled with faint black veins that beat weakly, as if something alive were struggling under her skin. "This isn't right," Huda whispered, her voice just audible above the shrieking wind outside. "What did it do to you?" "I don't know," Aiza answered, her tone flat. "But I can sense it, in me, as if it's waiting." Salma paced back and forth along the room, her brow knitted in concern. "We can't remain here, tonight. That thing, it isn't by itself. You heard it say, 'They are coming.' We must determine what we're facing before dawn, or we will die." "But how?" Sufyan whispered, raising one of his sketches, a crude drawing of overlapping circles and runes. "I've been studying protective symbols, but I don't know if they'll protect us from something like that." "We'll find a way," Imam said stubbornly, clenching the hilt of his knife. "If we watch each other's backs and stay smart, we might make it." Mubashir snorted contemptuously. "Stick together? From what? Ghosts? Demons? Whatever that was, it wasn't human. And look at what it did when it touched Aiza. It didn't even leave a mark, but just look at her. Something's off." "Enough," Salma commanded, cutting through the room with a stern stare. "Disagreement isn't going to assist us. We require answers, and we require them soon. Hisham, tell me what you've discovered." Hisham paused, fidgeting with his glasses before opening the old book he had been studying previously. Its pages were cracked and yellow, their writing done in a script none of them could read, but for occasional lines translated into wavering English. "This book is about an ancient relic buried under Karagand," he started, his tone firm despite the tension in the air. "It refers to it as the Mirror of Shadows, a portal between worlds forged by a lost people. Legend has it that the mirror was used to speak with spirits, but it became tainted. Those who looked into it said they heard voices calling to them, drawing them in until they disappeared without leaving a trace." "Vanished?" Javaria croaked weakly from her makeshift bed in the corner. Her fever had worsened, leaving her pale and shivering. "You mean, it ate them?" Hisham nodded grimly. "Not exactly. It pulled them into another realm, a shadow world ruled by entities that feed on fear and despair. Once someone enters, they become trapped forever, their souls consumed bit by bit. So that thing downstairs," Fahim hung in mid-sentence, gulping. "It's one of those beings?" "Perhaps," Hisham conceded. "Or maybe something worse. The books say there's a guardian, a being charged with safeguarding the mirror and preventing anyone from leaving once they've made the transition. If that's the case, then what we saw tonight wasn't just fighting us. It was testing us." "Testing us for what?" Aqib demanded, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. "To see if we're strong enough to resist," Salma answered quietly. "And judging by what happened to Aiza, we're failing." The revelation hung heavy in the air, suffocating any hope of escape. Each sibling processed the information differently, some with quiet resignation, others with mounting panic. "Who is the message?" Imam inquired, nodding towards the wall upon which the words, "They are coming," still stood in bold scarlet. "Who wrote these? Was it the monster?" "No," Sufyan uttered abruptly, shocking everyone. He had another sheet of paper in his hand with quickly scribbled symbols upon it. "I believe it was another person giving us a warning." "Warning us of what?" Mubashir exclaimed, raking his hair in exasperation. "We already know we're royally screwed." "About the others," Sufyan answered enigmatically. When incredulous stares were met with silence, he filled in the gaps. "The texts speak of several entities that are tied to the mirror. One guardian, yes, but also lesser specters, souls of those who were destroyed. They prowl the house, living on our terror, growing more powerful with each second we remain here." "Ah, that's why the whispers," Asa grumbled, hugging herself as if trying to shake off a shiver. "I've been hearing them for weeks, since we first moved in. I thought I was losing my mind, but now—" "You weren't," Salma completed for her, her face dark. "Which means we're not battling one foe. We're surrounded." Before anyone had a chance to react, the room grew colder. Their breaths became icy clouds, and the oil lamp danced frantically before extinguishing completely. They were plunged into darkness, relieved only by the faint lighting of lightning flashing through the broken window. And then there was the laughter, the same childlike, high-pitched giggle they had heard before. But this time, it was not far away. It was near, impossibly near, as if it was coming from inside the very walls. "Do you hear that?" Fahim breathed, his voice trembling. "It's coming from everywhere." The door suddenly crashed shut with a blinding clang. The lock clicked loudly, trapping them inside. Pandemonium broke out as they made for the door, hammering with fists and feet, but it would not move. "It's locked!" Aqib bellowed, struggling in vain with the handle. "From the outside!" "Impossible!" Mubashir screamed, grabbing a chair from the desk and battering it against the door. The wood shattered, but the door remained firm. While the others were busy trying to escape, Asa saw something unusual. Under the desk, there was a weak glimmer coming from the floorboards. Getting down on her hands and knees, she followed her fingers along the cracks until she discovered what seemed like a secret compartment. Tensely opening it with trembling fingers, she found a tiny, intricately patterned box with delicate engravings. "What is it?" Salma snapped, seeing her find. "I don't know," Asa said, holding it up for examination. The box was chilly to the touch, colder even than the unnatural cold in the room. When she opened it, a searing light burst out, causing everyone to block their eyes. When the brightness faded, they found themselves no longer in the study, but standing in a vast, desolate landscape bathed in perpetual twilight. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and barren, stretching endlessly in all directions. Above them loomed a blood-red sky, streaked with jagged bolts of lightning. Where are we?" Huda stammered, clutching Javaria protectively. "The shadow world," Hisham breathed, his face ashen. "We've crossed over." Before they could process what was around them, a chorus of whispers broke out everywhere, echoing all around. Figures started to form in the distance, distorted humanoid silhouettes with long limbs and blank faces. They stumbled irregularly, jerking and twitching as if manipulated by external forces. "They're coming," Sufyan whispered, his voice almost inaudible amidst the din of voices. Just like in the message. Imam drew his knife and stood in front of the group, guardingly. "Close ranks. Don't let them isolate us." But the darkness moved more quickly than expected. One moved forward, its body taking on shape to form a monstrous parody of humanity. Its jaws stretched wide, and it bared rows of needle-like teeth, shrieking loudly enough to cause waves of sickness to wash through them. "Run!" Salma cried out, seizing Aiza's hand and yanking her toward a tumble of pointed rocks in the distance. The rest were quick to follow, skipping over creaking fissures that divided the ground from grasping hands that tried to halt them. Ahead of them, the throng spread. The people massed into an increasingly swelling sea behind them. Whispers merged, drowning one another into an obscene cacophony of suffering and hopelessness. "We can't outrun them," Fahim exclaimed, tottering under the wear of exhaustion. "There!" Hisham bellowed, gesturing forward. Amidst the rocks was a thin crevice, just wide enough for one to slip inside. "In there!" Quickly! One at a time, they plunged into the crevice, hugging the rocky stone walls as the darkness rushed by, their screams echoing back into the void. For an instant, relief flooded over them. They had escaped, at least for the time being. But as they gasped for air, Aiza saw something terrifying. The fancy box she had opened was missing, and in its stead, scrawled on the rocky wall next to her, was a single word in oozing red letters. Trapped. The text, "Trapped," pulsed softly on the stone wall, its red color beating like a pulse. Aiza looked at it, her breath catching as she understood the reality. They were not safe here. The shadows may have gone for a while, but the message was audible. They were still within the shadow world, and whatever energy ruled this place was sure to find them. "We can't linger here," Imam told her abruptly, his tone low and insistent. He surveyed the thin crevice, his knife held guardedly, even though there was no immediate threat. "If those creatures track us down again, we won't have a second chance to leave." "But where do we go?" Huda demanded, holding Javaria close. Her little sister had weakened since their arrival in this barren wasteland, her body racked by fever, shaking uncontrollably. "We're surrounded by nothing, just emptiness." Salma moved forward, her face stern but determined. "We move. Standing here is suicide. This place survives on fear. It grows stronger because of it. If we give in to it, we'll only make it stronger." Aqib nodded, though his hands shook as he tightened the strap of the lantern over his shoulder. "She's right. We must keep moving, even if we don't know where we're headed. Standing in place will kill us quicker than running blind." As they were about to emerge from the relative security of the crevice, Aiza saw something else carved into the rock next to the threatening warning. It was a symbol, a circle divided by 3 lines that intersected each other, each terminating in a pointed tip. She knew it at once. It was one of the protective wards Sufyan had been drawing earlier. "Sufyan," she whispered urgently, pointing to the carving. "Look at this. Is this one of your symbols?" Sufyan pushed past the others, his eyes widening as he examined the mark. "Yes? But how did it get here? I've never seen anything like it outside my books." "Maybe it's a clue," Hisham suggested, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "A way out, or at least a way to protect ourselves." Before anyone could answer, the earth under their feet started to shake. Fissures spread like a web across the cracked ground, pumping out plumes of bitter smoke that seared their lungs. Out of the depths of the chasm, there came a noise unlike anything they'd ever known, a raw growl that seemed to shake through their very bones. "It knows we're here," Mubashir muttered, his usual bravado replaced by stark terror. "Whatever controls this place, it's coming for us." The ground around them changed unnaturally, as if the world itself were alive and responding to their presence. Twisted rocks contorted into grotesque forms, like bony fingers clawing towards the sky. The blood-red sky deepened further, obscuring what little light there was until only weak flashes of lightning illuminated their world. Each flash showed brief glimpses of movement, dark shapes moving too fast to see, their shapes too quick to follow. The air thickened, weighing on them like an unseen burden. Each step became a struggle, as if the earth itself was fighting against their movement. Even the whispers crept back in, louder and more urgent now, crawling through their heads like poison ivy. "You cannot leave. This is your home now. Join us." Each voice had a different tone, some cajoling, others taunting, but all had the same purpose: to shatter their determination. Huda clapped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop! Please, make it stop!" Javaria whimpered weakly in her arms, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in hours. "Huda, it hurts." "I know, sweetheart," Huda murmured, brushing damp strands of hair from her sister's forehead. "I'm so sorry." Imam knelt beside them, placing a reassuring hand on Huda's shoulder. "Keep moving. We'll figure something out, I promise." But his words rang hollow, even to himself. None of them had any idea how to fight back against an enemy they couldn't see or understand. All they could do was run and hope they didn't stumble into something worse. As they marched across the desolate wasteland, tensions burst. Fear eroded their sanity, making friends into enemies. "This is useless!" Mubashir cried, kicking a random pebble in anger. "We're walking in circles! Look at the ground! It's the same damn cracks, the same patterns! Nothing changes!" "That's because you're seeking logic where there isn't any," Hisham shot back curtly. "This isn't our world. It doesn't follow rules we can understand." "Great. Thanks for the lecture," Mubashir retorted, rolling his eyes. "So what's your master plan, genius? Read another old book while the rest of us are dying?" "Enough!" Salma snapped, turning to confront them. Her patience was thinning, and the tension was evident in the set of her jaw. "Fighting won't get us through this. If you two want to stand here and rip each other apart, go ahead. But don't expect the rest of us to wait for you." Her words brought silence to the argument, though the tension was still present, seething below the surface. Everyone was aware she was correct, but the unknown made collaboration almost impossible. Before them, Sufyan halted, his eyes staring off into the distance. "See that?" he whispered, hardly audible. They tracked his gaze and saw it. A giant building standing on the horizon, its outline jagged and uneven. It resembled a cathedral, but twisted, as if seen through rippling water. Lightning lit up its spires, casting long, bent shadows that squirmed like living things. "What is that place?" Fahim breathed, tightening his prayer beads. "A trap," Mubashir growled darkly. "It has to be, or a sanctuary," Salma replied, her voice measured but optimistic. "We won't know unless we look." Against their better instincts, they edged toward the building cautiously, their steps crunching softly on the dry ground. As they came closer, the details became clear. There were carvings on the walls, delicate patterns of anguish and despair. There were figures with empty eyes reaching up to the sky, mouths contorted into silent screams. A huge wooden door, with iron bands running across it that shone weakly in the dim light, stood at the bottom of the building. "This is all wrong," Asa muttered, her flesh prickling as she gazed at the carvings. "As if it's staring back at us." "It is most likely," Imam said, holding his knife a little harder. "Keep watch." Sufyan approached the doorframe carefully, inspecting it with particular interest. Trapped inside the wood was yet another symbol, another just like the one that had been inscribed in the crevice. His hands trembled as he touched it with his fingertips. "These marks, they're leading us," he said deliberately, turning to the group. "The person who left them intended for us to discover this place." "As protection?" Aqib asked with incredulity. "Or as bait?" Before anyone could answer, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a yawning darkness within. A cold wind swept out, carrying with it the stench of decay and something far worse, despair. It seeped into their pores, weighing them down with an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. "No way," Mubashir muttered, backing away instinctively. "There's no way I'm stepping foot in there." "We have no other option," Salma asserted, entering with confidence. Her lantern created flickering shadows on the walls, exposing more carvings in the stone. These were different from the ones outside. These showed figures standing defiantly against the monstrous things, armed with weapons made of light. This was not always a prison, Hisham noted, his voice laced with wonder. It used to be a fortress, a bastion of resistance. Resistance against what? Asked Fahim anxiously, looking over his shoulder as if something was likely to jump out at them. Against the Mirror of Shadows. Aza breathed, her eyes captured by a mural showing a gigantic mirror ringed by twisting tendrils of darkness. At the center of the picture was a solitary figure carrying a glowing orb, their face hidden behind a hood. Below the painting were words inscribed in an ancient hand. Only the chosen may wield the light. As they pressed deeper into the building, the air became colder and the whispers louder. They took the children to a magnificent room at the core of the building, its ceiling hidden in darkness. A pedestal stood at the room's center, and on top of it lay a crystalline orb, identical to that seen in the mural. Its surface glowed dimly, emitting warmth that stood in vivid contrast to the suffocating cold that closed around them. The light. Sufyan panted, taking a step forward toward the orb cautiously. It has to be the way out of this place. But he never got the chance to touch it, for the ground shook violently and knocked all of them off their feet. Out of the darkness stepped the Guardian, the same bony beast that had run at them in the house. Its bright red eyes fixed on the orb, and it unleashed a deafening roar that caused several of the carvings nearby to shatter. "You fools!" it growled, its voice rumbling like thunder. "That orb belongs to me! You intrude on my territory!" Imam charged at it, knife held high. "Back off!" The monster struck at him with a razor-sharp hand, knocking him off his feet. Blood oozed from a cut on his temple, but he leapt up, not willing to retreat. As the others kept the Guardian busy, Aza took the chance to grab the orb. As soon as her fingers made contact with its surface, she felt a burst of energy sweep through her, knocking her to her knees. Images assailed her mind, images of the mirror's making, its corruption, and the hundreds of souls it had devoured. In their midst, she saw herself, standing in front of the artifact, her own reflection twisted into something foreign. "No," she gasped, clutching her head. "Not me." Suddenly the orb flared brightly, engulfing the room in blinding light. When it faded, the Guardian was gone. But so was the exit. "Well, that worked perfectly," Mubashir muttered sarcastically, gesturing to the sealed doorway. "Now we're trapped in here instead of out there. Great job, Aza." "It wasn't her fault," Salma snapped, glaring at him. "She saved us from that thing." "Temporarily," Hisham put in grimly. "But the orb will not hold for long. Something that imprisoned us in here will give way in time." And in sync with the timing, the walls started moving, creaking as if it were a living thing. The carvings changed to form new scenes, scenes of devastation and violence. One in particular horrified, the siblings themselves, their features twisted in agony as dark-colored tendrils pulled them toward the mirror. "We need to use the orb," Sufyan said urgently, pointing to a circular indentation in the floor directly beneath the pedestal. "Place it there. Maybe it'll activate some kind of portal." Aza hesitated, clutching the orb tightly. She could still feel its energy coursing through her, whispering promises of salvation, but also warnings of sacrifice. "What happens if we're wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "What if this makes things worse?" "There's only one way to find out," Salma answered, her voice leaving no space for debate. Aza took a deep breath, set the orb into the hollow. Nothing was happening at all for a second, and then the ground exploded in a fall of golden light, shaping themselves into interwoven patterns that curled outwards like vines crawling through the ground. And then the whispers were back, not as a melee, but as a single voice that spoke together. "Welcome home, chosen one." The light faded, and they saw a new scene. They were not inside the fortress anymore. They were in a huge mirrored chamber surrounded by reflections of themselves from all sides. But something was off. Their reflections moved on their own, grinning evilly as they stretched out toward the actual versions of them. The mirrors shattered one by one, and from the cracks stepped shadowy duplicates of the siblings, their eyes burning with evil purpose. "Kill them," the voice instructed, echoing from everywhere. "Take their place." When the first duplicate attacked, Aza saw the ghastly reality. The orb hadn't set them free. It had led them deeper into the center of the mirror's curse. The hall of mirrors went on forever in every direction, its surfaces rippling like liquid silver. Every reflection glared back at them, not as simple echoes of themselves, but as distorted copies that appeared to be alive, their movements jerky and unnatural. When the first shadowy copy charged forward, shattering free from the broken glass, Aiza's blood froze. "Back off!" Imam yelled, pushing Aiza behind him as he held up his knife in defense. His tone was firm, but the terror in his eyes betrayed the fear holding them all in its grip. The copy smiled nastily, the jagged teeth seeming to flash in the shadows. It glided with a creepy suppleness, its limbs bending at impossible joints as it ringed them like a predator stalking its quarry. Behind it, other copies came out of the mirrors. Their unblinking, glowing eyes regarded the group with predatory purpose. "We can't fight them all," Mubashir screamed, retreating until his back was against one of the mirrored walls. He winced as his own face glared back at him, its hand stretching out to slap against the glass as if it were attempting to shatter through. "Yes, we can," Salma shot back sharply, her voice slicing across the growing panic. She picked up a piece of the shattered mirror off the floor and wielded it like a crude weapon. "If they're reflections, then they're connected to us in some way. Kill them, and possibly we damage whatever is running this place." Her words ignited a spark of hope, but the situation was critical. The duplicates were more in number, and their movements were too quick, too erratic. They moved in one by one, pushing the siblings into a huddle. "This is crazy," Fahim whispered to himself, holding his prayer beads so hard they dug into his palms. "How do you battle something that appears to be just like you?" "You don't think about it," Imam said with a grim smile. "You just do." The mirrored corridor echoed every noise, making even the faintest whisper sound like a chorus of echoes. Footsteps boomed like thunder, and the metallic clink of knives against pieces of glass made them shiver. The air chilled by the second, ice creeping along the edges of the mirrors, as if the very atmosphere was against them. Above them, the ceiling, if there even was one, remained shrouded by coiling mist, creating an air of infinite space. Occasionally, bursts of fiery lightning illuminated the area, briefly revealing glimpses of grotesque forms contorted within the cloud. The figures appeared somewhat humanoid, but bent beyond identification, their elongated limbs bending unrealistically as they floated just beyond grasp. The oppressive environment weighed heavily on their minds, planting seeds of paranoia and doubt. Each look at their reflections had them wondering if they were actually looking at themselves or another copy waiting to pounce. Even the slight warmth emanating from the orb Aiza had deposited in the pedestal moments before did little to dissipate the stifling fear. Huda grasped Javaria defensively, her fever-stricken younger sister's body racked with violently shaking tremors in her embrace. "We can't tarry here," she breathed softly, her whisper almost lost over the din of whispers issuing forth from the mirrors. "It's devouring us whole." "She's not wrong," concurred Hisham, settling his glasses securely on his face. "The place is consuming our terror. The longer we remain, the more powerful it grows." "But where do we go?" Aqib insisted, his knuckles clenched as he held the hilt of his sword. "Every way is more mirrors, and more of those things." Before anyone could answer, the first copy launched an attack. The beast attacked Imam, its claws whipping through the air with sickening velocity. He dodged barely in time, striking back with a quick slash of his blade that nicked its arm. To everyone's amazement, the wound didn't bleed. It just smoked, as if the copy was composed of smoke instead of flesh. "It is not real!" Sufyan screamed, gesturing wildly at the wound. "They're illusions! You must concentrate on shattering the mirrors!" Imam took an instant's pause, but that was all the copy needed to get back up. With a reptilian growl, it lashed out once more, this time landing a blow across his chest. Blood flowered on his shirt, and he reeled backward, muscles clenching in pain. "Imam!" Aiza exclaimed, dashing to his side amid the confusion that surrounded them. She applied pressure to his wound, attempting to stem the bleeding, but her fingers came away wet with an icy coldness. Something was amiss. The blood was not right, nearly gelatinous, as if it wasn't fully human. "They're using our weaknesses against us," Salma said grimly, dodging a swipe from another duplicate. "Each one knows exactly how to exploit our fears." As if to prove her point, the duplicate facing Mubashir began to speak in his own voice, mocking him relentlessly. "Still clinging to logic, huh? Still pretending none of this is real? Look at yourself. You're pathetic." Mubashir went stiff, his face ashen with fury and shame. The copy took advantage, striking its fist all the way through the mirror at its back and hauling him halfway through the mirror's surface. He shrieked as his legs hung helpless, unable to break free despite all his straining. "Help me!" he bellowed, his voice breaking. "It's pulling me in!" Fahim acted swiftly, shattering the mirror with a large fragment of wreckage. The copy let out a blood-curdling scream as it disintegrated into smoke, freeing Mubashir, who fell to the ground struggling for breath. "That's how we stop them," Fahim exclaimed proudly, holding aloft the crude weapon. "Shatter the mirrors," said easier than done. The copies bred quicker than they could kill them, appearing in fresh cracks in the glass as soon as others were broken. The brothers struggled frantically, their actions slowing as fatigue took hold. In the midst of the bedlam, Aiza saw something strange about the orb still lodged in the pedestal. Its brightness pulsed back and forth rhythmically, syncing with the pattern of the whispers that filled the hall. Staring, aghast, the orb conjured up a series of photographs on the nearest mirror, a jerky series of images that depicted the history of the Mirror of Shadows. She witnessed the creation of the artifact, crafted by an ancient people who wanted to bridge the two worlds. Initially, it was used as a means of communicating with good spirits, providing counsel and wisdom. However, with time, greed tainted its intent, and it was used for conquest. People who looked into it wanted power, but it was engulfed by the evil that lay within. The last image depicted a solitary figure standing in front of the mirror, cradling the same orb now set into the pedestal. This individual had a hood over his face, but his stance emanated power. In his hand, the orb released a brilliant light that exploded the mirror into infinite pieces, dispersing its essence across the shadow realm. Aiza addressed Hisham, who had stopped in the middle of his fight to catch his breath. "That orb, it's not only a key, it's a weapon. We must use it to destroy the mirror once and for all." "How?" Hisham questioned, wiping the sweat on his forehead. "Even if we knew where the original mirror is, we're stuck here." "Perhaps not," Aiza answered, her thoughts in a whirl. "If the copies are bonded to us, then shattering the mirrors dissolves the link. If we shatter enough of them, perhaps we'll be able to escape." Her theory rekindled their determination. They worked together, striking the largest mirrors first, starting with those that contained multiples. When each broken pane emitted a shock wave of energy that radiated outwards, causing the hall itself to destabilize. Cracks traversed the walls, and pieces of ceiling started falling, showering the floor with shards of glass and debris. But their progress came at a high price. Wounds mounted rapidly, and tiredness crept into their movements. Still worse, the clones adjusted, learning to predict their attacks and retaliate with deadly accuracy. Just as they believed they could get the better of them, the earth shook violently beneath their feet. A great crack opened in the floor, and a gaping chasm yawned wide, full of twisting shadows. Out of the pit came a towering form, the Guardian, greater and more monstrous than ever. Its skeletal body towered above them, its empty sockets blazing with rage. "You dare to resist me!" it bellowed, its thunderous voice quaking the foundation of the hall. "I am the guardian of this kingdom. Without me, you wouldn't be living at all." Sufyan advanced, holding one of his guard talismans. "You are mistaken. We lived before you brought us here, and we will live on after you depart." The Guardian chuckled, a loud, rumbling laugh that rumbled like thunder. "Foolish mortal, your life is nothing. You are nothing but pieces in a game much larger than you can understand." With a flick of its clawed hand, the Guardian called up a blast of energy that hurled the siblings across the room. They crashed to the floor, their swords sliding out of reach. Before they could get up, the duplicates surrounded them, holding them down. "You will not succeed," the Guardian taunted, advancing. "Your defiance is useless." But Aiza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors." The orb burst gloriously, illuminating the hall in a sea of gold. The copies screamed as their bodies dissolved, dissipating into threads of smoke that vanished into nothing. The Guardian stumbled back, covering its eyes from the radiance. "What have you done?" it roared, its voice thick with fear. "I've broken your curse," Aiza said, standing upright even in pain. "And I'm taking my family home." The light grew brighter, filling the whole hall with a brilliant radiance. The mirrors exploded all at once, their shards breaking down into particles of light that danced around the siblings in a whirlwind. For an instant, all was quiet. The whispers, the snarls, the thunder, all drowned out by an otherworldly hum that vibrated deep within their hearts. As the light disappeared, they stood in the foyer of their family home. The haunted mirror was broken on the ground, its surface fractured beyond restoration. Relief flooded over them, blended with incredulity. They were alive. But as they panted, Aiza saw something unnerving. Her image in the shards of the mirror didn't follow her movements. Rather, it smiled weakly, its lips curling into a smug smile. "Did we actually make it out?" she whispered, her voice no louder than the wind. In time for nobody to respond, the house bucked and reeled. In the corners of the room, shadows crept, taking shape as duplicates, the ones who hadn't perished but were brought back. The door slammed shut, the sound making everyone's heart stop, shutting them in with the duplicates. Lightning crackled outside, highlighting the faces of their shadowed pursuers who moved forward threateningly. "You broke the mirror," the Guardian spoke, with malice dripping from his words. "But you cannot escape yourselves." The duplicates moved closer, and Aiza understood the gruesome truth. The curse was not bound to the mirror. It was bound to them. And now, it was home. The house creaked under the pressure of an unseen force, its old beams groaning as if in protest of the intrusion of something unnatural. Shadows danced on the walls, writhing like living things, their movement timed to the thudding rain outside. The shards of the accursed mirror were strewn about the foyer, jagged and glinting ominously in the light of the flickering lantern. But it wasn't the shattered relic that caught Aiza's eye. It was her reflection. Or at least, what passed for her reflection. Even though the mirror was in pieces, her image was unscathed, standing erect and unbroken in the biggest piece. Its gaze met hers, shining with an evil intelligence that sent shivers coursing down her back. "Think you've won?" the reflection murmured, its voice dripping with malice. "You've just scratched the surface." Aiza took a stumbling step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" The reflection grinned, a sly, feline curve of lips, and cocked its head as if amused by her terror. The mirror is nothing but a receptacle. The curse. It resides in you now. Before she could answer, the house lurched violently, sending everyone off balance. From the room's corners, the dark duplicates coalesced completely, their eyes aglow with a fierce, predatory stare. They glided smoothly, their bodies oscillating between human and monstrous, as if undecided which form to take. "We're trapped once more," Huda sobbed, holding Javaria close. Her younger sister had weakened since their return from the world of shadows, her feverish body shaking unsteadily. "How do we battle them this time?" "We don't," Salma replied sternly, holding a piece of the mirror in a tight fist. "We endure." The claustrophobic air within the house reflected the turmoil of the storm howling outside. Each blast of wind screamed through creaks in the twisted wooden shutters, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and rot. Candles flickered and expired, and they were left dependent upon the faint light of oil lamps, their dancing flames casting wretched shadows that appeared near lifelike. The air thickened with every second, pushing down upon them as if an intangible force. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating the life out of the room, and maybe the individuals inside. The whispers again crawled back, louder and more urgent than ever, winding through their thoughts like poison ivy. "You can't get away. You belong to us. Come with us." Each voice carried a different tone, some pleading, others taunting, but all shared the same intent, to break their resolve. Imam tightened his grip on his knife, scanning the room for any sign of weakness in their enemies. "Stay close. Don't let them separate us." So much easier said than done. The copies outnumbered them, and their actions were too swift, too erratic. One of them attacked Mubashir, its claws ripping through the air with deadly speed. He was barely able to avoid it, crashing into a nearby wall as the creature turned on him. "Help!" he cried out, his voice rising into panic. "It's trying to suck me in." Fahim acted quickly, slamming the closest shard of mirror into the duplicate's back. It screamed, disintegrating into smoke, but two others appeared in its place almost immediately. The process continued ad infinitum, leaving the siblings winded and bruised. "This isn't working!" Aqib shouted, cleaning blood from a gash on his forehead. "There's too many of them." "Then we must discover another method," Salma said curtly, her voice not open to debate. She approached Hisham, who was desperately leafing through the old book he had been reading before. "Hisham, tell me you've discovered something helpful." Hisham paused, tugging at his glasses nervously before he replied. "The texts speak of a ritual, a recitation used to cut off the link between the accursed and the accursed. But it needs specific ingredients including—" He fell silent, his eyes flicking towards Aza. She could feel her gut plummeting. Whatever he was going to tell her, she already knew that it would be bad. "What?" Imam's voice was now sharp with need. "With a sacrifice," Hisham concluded softly. "Someone must give themselves up to the mirror, to become its anchor so the others may flee." There was a weighty silence in the group, oppressive. Everyone looked around nervously, the meaning percolating into them slowly. Sacrifice wasn't a figure of speech here. It was a sentence of death. "No," Aza insisted, stepping forward. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Hisham argued back, desperation coloring his voice. "This is why the mirror was originally created, to catch a person who will take on the weight of the curse. If there's no anchor, the things will keep returning, every time getting more powerful." "So what? We just grab somebody and toss them to the wolves?" Mubashir flashed back at him, his usual cynicism swapped out for cold fury. "Who makes that decision? You?" "It's not about making a choice," Salma interrupted, her face set grimly but unyieldingly. "It's about volunteering, If nobody does it, then we all perish." Before anyone could answer, the guardian's voice came ringing through the house, full of venom. "How generous of you to think of such sacrifice. But your own sacrifice will be of no use. The curse is eternal. It cannot be lifted." Aiza was furious, her fists clenching. There had to be another option. She would not accept that they were destined to die or sacrifice one of their own. "What about the orb?" she said abruptly, turning to the others. "It's still present, isn't it? Perhaps we can use it to enhance the ritual, to eliminate the curse altogether." Hisham scowled, leafing through the pages of the book once more. "That's feasible, but it would mean directing the energy of the orb into the ritual, and whoever does so. They'd have to take the brunt of the curse," Sufyan concluded for him, his tone near a whisper. "They'd be the anchor, and probably lose themselves in doing so." Aiza swallowed hard, her mouth parched. The burden of the choice settled upon her shoulders, weighing more than anything she'd ever known before. But deep within her, she was aware of what she needed to do. "I'll do it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "I started this. I'll finish it." Her declaration sparked a flurry of protests. "No way," Imam said immediately, stepping in front of her protectively. "You're not doing this alone." "She's right," Salma added, her tone firm but laced with concern. "If anyone should take the risk, it's me. I'm the oldest. I've lived longer than any of you. And I'm the strongest," Mubashir argued, flexing his arms defiantly. "If anyone can handle it, it's me." "You're all missing the point," Aiza interrupted, raising her voice enough to silence them. "This isn't about strength or age, it's about responsibility. The mirror called me. It chose me. If anyone has a chance of controlling the ritual, it's me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. No one dared argue further, though the pain in their eyes spoke volumes. They didn't want to lose her, but they also couldn't deny the logic of her reasoning. "Fine," Salma said finally, her voice strained with emotion. "But we're doing this together, every step of the way." Hisham nodded, referring to the book again. "The ritual calls for a circle of protection, traced with symbols from the energy of the orb. When it is activated, it will put a barrier between the curse and the rest of us. Within the circle, Aiza will chant the incantation and concentrate on the power of the orb." "What if it fails?" Fahim asked anxiously, gripping his prayer beads harder. "Then we're all dead," Hisham replied bluntly. "But if it does, the curse will be destroyed, and Aiza will become its anchor." The gravity of the threat fell over them like a mantle. The brother and sister laid out in silent preparation, seeking out whatever items they could that would help shield the ritual circle. Sufyan drew protective symbols on bits of paper, while Aqib and Imam collaborated to move trash from the middle of the foyer. As they geared up, Aiza knelt by the pedestal on which the orb lay, its soft luminescence throbbing in rhythm. She rested her hands upon it, sensing the warmth transfer to her palms. Visions stormed her mind anew, sights of the creation of the mirror, its tainting, and the untold number of lives it had destroyed. She saw herself among them, standing in front of the artifact, her own face twisted into a monstrous form. "Whatever it is," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking, "I won't let it win." Just as they completed drawing the circle, the house bucked and shuddered, knocking everyone off their feet. The Guardian burst out of the darkness, bigger and more grotesque than ever before. Its bony corpse towered over them, its empty sockets glowing with rage. "You dare challenge me?" it roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the house. "I am eternal. Your pitiful rituals mean nothing." Sufyan stepped forward, clutching one of his protective symbols. "You're wrong. This ends now." With a flick of its clawed hand, the Guardian called upon a burst of energy that sent the siblings off their feet. They crashed onto the ground, their weapons flying out of their reach. By the time they could get to their feet, the duplicates closed in, holding them down. "You will never win," the Guardian taunted, advancing on them. "Your defiance is pointless." But Aza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors." The orb expanded in a blinding flash, filling the hall with golden radiance. The copies shrieked as they dissolved, shrinking to puffs of smoke that vanished into the air. The Guardian reeled back, its eyes covered by its hands. "What have you done?" it thundered, its voice filled with despair. "I've broken your curse," Aza said, keeping her back straight despite her wounds. "And I'm returning my family to their home." The light grew stronger, filling the whole hall with a warm glow. The mirrors exploded all at once, their shards breaking down into wisps of light that danced around the siblings like a whirlwind. For an instant, all was quiet. The whispers, the snarls, the thunder, all drowned out by an otherworldly hum that vibrated deep within their hearts. As the light dissolved, they were standing inside the foyer of their family's old home. The haunted mirror shattered on the floor, its face cracked and unfixable. Relief flowed through them, tempered with shock. They had escaped. But while catching their breath, Aza sensed something appalling. Her own image in what remained of the mirror did not coordinate with her own movements. It smiled, faintly, with its lips twisting into a sneering smile instead. "Did we actually escape?" she whispered, her voice a soft echo. The house lurched before anyone could respond. Shadows from the edges of the room crept in, taking on recognizable forms. The copies hadn't been annihilated. Instead, they'd followed them home. The front door crashed open and shut with a sound like thunder, trapping them inside all over again. Lightning broke outside, illuminating the faces of their shadowy followers as they moved ominously forward. "You broke the mirror," the Guardian's voice resonated, laced with venom. "But you cannot escape yourselves." As the duplicates advanced, Aza understood the ghastly reality. The curse was not attached to the mirror. It was attached to them. And now, it had returned home. The front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside once more. Lightning flashed outside, casting eerie light on the faces of their dark pursuers as they moved forward menacingly. Each duplicate had an uncanny resemblance to its original counterpart, but their features were twisted, eyes glowing like embers, mouths stretched into grotesque grins that seemed too wide. Aza's heart raced in her chest as she gazed at her own face in the biggest piece of the broken mirror. It wasn't just copying her actions anymore. It was taunting her. Its lips curled into a wicked grin, and its voice whispered into her mind, "You thought you could destroy me? I am part of you now." Before she could answer, the Guardian towered over them, its bony form casting long, jagged shadows on the floor. "Your pitiful attempts at defiance are amusing," it snarled, its voice rumbling like rolling thunder. "But you cannot flee what you have become." Imam moved forward, holding up his knife in spite of the weariness etched on his face. "We're not afraid of you anymore." The Guardian laughed, a bellow that rocked the very foundations of the house. Courageous words from one who holds to denial. "Look around you. You bear my curse in your veins. With every breath you breathe, you nourish it. With every beating heart, you make it stronger." As if to demonstrate its point, the copies charged ahead, their motion synchronized and chillingly smooth. They were quicker than before, their claws raking through the air with dreadful accuracy. The siblings struggled to fight back, but exhaustion hindered their response, leaving them exposed. "We can't hold on any longer," Mubashir bellowed, just avoiding a slash from his copy. "They're too powerful." "Them's us!" Asa screamed back, her voice ringing out over the commotion. "That's why they're so dogged, because they're familiar with our flaws better than we are." The words struck a chord with Salma, and she nodded, taking a sliver of the shattered mirror and using it to parry a blow coming towards Huda. "Then we fight cleverer, not stronger. Use what they know against them." The suffocating tension within the house grew, as if the walls themselves were sentient and living off their terror. Each groan of the twisted wooden beams echoed with footsteps, each dance of candlelight casting eerie shadows that were almost alive. The whispers resumed, louder and more urgent, crawling through their brains like poison ivy. "You cannot escape. You belong to us. Join us." Every voice had a distinct tone, some of pleading, some of taunting, but all the same purpose: to shatter their determination. The air thickened, weighing down upon them like an intangible force. Even the faint heat emanating from the orb could not disperse the crushing fear. Huda held Javaria tightly, her younger sister's fevered body shuddering convulsively in her arms. "We can't stay here," she breathed, streaming tears down her cheeks. "It's devouring us." "She's right," Hisham said, rubbing his glasses nervously. "This thing lives on our terror. The longer we remain, the more power it gains." "But where do we go?" Aqib growled, his knuckles white as he clutched the hilt of his sword. "Every direction is more mirrors, and more of those things." Before anyone could answer, the ground shook violently. A huge crack split the floor and opened up into a yawning chasm filled with twisting shadows. From the depths of the abyss came the Guardian, bigger and more monstrous than ever before. Its bony skeleton towered above them, its empty eyes blazing with anger. "You dare challenge me?" it thundered, its voice shaking the foundations of the hall. "I am the guardian of this world. Without me, you would not be." Sufyan advanced, holding one of his guard symbols. "You're mistaken. We were here before you brought us here, and we'll be here after you're dead." The Guardian laughed, a loud, rumbling sound that rumbled like thunder. "Foolish mortal. Your life is nothing. You are nothing but pawns in a game much larger than you can understand." With a swipe of its clawed hand, the Guardian conjured a burst of energy that knocked the siblings off their feet. They thudded hard, their weapons rolling out of their reach. The duplicates were upon them before they could get back up, pinning them down. "You cannot triumph," the Guardian taunted, advancing on them. "Your defiance is useless." But Aiza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors." The orb glowed blindingly, lighting up the hall in yellow radiance. The copies wailed as their bodies dissolved, fragmenting into smoke that thinned away into nothing. The Guardian stumbled backward, covering its eyes from the brightness. "What have you done?" it thundered, its voice racked with hysteria. "I've broken your curse." Asa stood firm though injured. "And I'm bringing my family home." The light grew stronger, filling the whole hall with a brilliant glow. The mirrors exploded in unison, their shards melting into specks of light that danced around the siblings like a whirlwind. For an instant, all was quiet. The whispers, the snarls, the thunder, all silenced by an otherworldly hum that vibrated deep within their very being. As the light dimmed, they stood in the foyer of their family home. The haunted mirror was broken on the ground, its surface cracked irreparably. Relief swept over them, combined with incredulity. They had made it through. But as they regained their breath, Aiza saw something unsettling. Her image in the shards of the mirror did not follow her movements. Instead, it smiled weakly, its lips twisting into a sly grin. "Did we actually escape?" she whispered, her voice just above a whisper. Before anyone had a chance to respond, the house trembled fiercely. Out of the edges of the room, shadows started creeping, materializing into known forms. The duplicates hadn't been killed, they had come with them. Aiza's heart fell as realization set in. The ritual hadn't succeeded, not fully. Although the curse's physical form had been dissipated, its true nature was still attached to them. Every sibling carried a shard of the mirror's blackness within themselves, an element of the curse that wouldn't leave. "This isn't finished," she whispered, her voice shaking with a combination of fear and resolve. "The curse isn't attached to the mirror, it's attached to you. That's why the copies keep returning." Salma scowled, her forehead creased in concentration. "So what do we do? How do we break the link?" Hisham rummaged through the aged book, fingers trembling as he sought solutions. There's an alternative, a last ceremony, but it's risky, much riskier than the initial one." "How dangerous?" Imam inquired quickly, his voice laced with alarm. "It involves fusing with the orb," Hisham told her, his voice somber. "The one who does the ritual will be using its full power, basically being a vessel for its energy. If it works, it will cleanse the curse completely. But at the price." "The price?" Aiza asked, her gut dropping. "The ritualist might not make it through," Hisham reluctantly confessed. "Their soul might get destroyed in the process." Silence fell over the group, heavy and suffocating. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances, the implications sinking in slowly. Sacrifice wasn't just a word here, it was a death sentence. "No," Imam said immediately, stepping in front of Aiza protectively. "You're not doing this alone." "She's right," Salma added, her tone firm but laced with concern. "If anyone should take the risk, it's me. I'm the oldest. I've lived longer than any of you. And I'm the strongest," Mubashir argued, flexing his arms defiantly. "If anyone can handle it, it's me." "You're all missing the point," Aiza interrupted, raising her voice enough to silence them. "This isn't about strength or age. It's about responsibility. The mirror called me. It chose me. If anyone has a chance of controlling the ritual, it's me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. No one dared argue further, though the pain in their eyes spoke volumes. They didn't want to lose her, but they also couldn't deny the logic of her reasoning. "Fine," Salma said finally, her voice strained with emotion. "But we're doing this together, every step of the way." Hisham nodded, referring to the book again. "The ritual demands a circle of protection, drawn with symbols from the energy of the orb. Once it is activated, it will shield the curse from the rest of us. Within the circle, Aiza will recite the incantation with concentration on the power of the orb." "What if it fails?" Fahim asked anxiously, gripping his prayer beads tighter. "Then we're all dead," Hisham replied bluntly. "But if it does, the curse will be destroyed, and Aiza will become its anchor." The seriousness of the situation hung over them like a pall. The siblings worked in silence, collecting whatever materials they could find to strengthen the ritual circle. Sufyan drew the protective symbols on pieces of paper, while Aqib and Imam collaborated to sweep away trash from the center of the foyer. As they readied themselves, Aiza knelt at the pedestal upon which the orb lay, its soft light pulsating in time. She rested her palms against its surface and felt its heat infuse into her flesh. Visions came into her mind again, scenes of the mirror's birth, its corruption, and all the souls it had devoured. In them, she saw herself, standing before the artifact, her own reflection distorted into something unrecognizable. "Whatever it is," she spoke to herself in a whisper, her voice shaking, "I won't give in." As they had just completed sketching the circle, The house violently shook and knocked everyone off their feet. The Guardian burst forth from the darkness, its size and monster form greater than ever before. Its bony structure towered above them, its empty sockets blazing with anger. "You dare challenge me?" it roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the house. "I am eternal. Your pitiful rituals mean nothing." Sufyan stepped forward, clutching one of his protective symbols. "You're wrong. This ends now." With a sweep of its clawed hand, the Guardian called forth a burst of energy that knocked the siblings off their feet. They hit the ground with a thud, their weapons sliding out of reach. The duplicates were on them before they could catch their breath. "You will not succeed," the Guardian taunted, advancing. "Your opposition is useless." But Aza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors." The orb exploded in a brilliant flash, illuminating the hall in golden radiance. The copies shrieked as their bodies dissolved, breaking down into tendrils of smoke that scattered into nothingness. The Guardian stumbled back, covering its eyes from the glare. "What have you done?" it thundered, its voice full of terror. "I've broken your curse," Aza said, standing firm in spite of her wounds. "And I'm taking my family home." The light grew stronger, filling the whole hall with a warm glow. The mirrors exploded all at once, their shards melting into clouds of light that danced around the siblings in a whirlwind. For an instant, all was quiet. The whispers, the snarls, the thunder, all swallowed up by an otherworldly hum that vibrated deep within their very beings. As the light dissipated, they stood in the foyer of their family home. The evil mirror was in pieces on the floor, its cracked surface beyond salvage. Relief flooded them, accompanied by incredulity. They lived. But as they regained their breath, Aza observed something unsettling. Her image in the pieces of the mirror wasn't in sync with her movements. Rather, it smiled weakly, its mouth curling into a sly grin. "Did we really escape?" she whispered, her words hardly audible. No one could respond before the house violently trembled. From the room's corners, darkness started to pool, taking shape into the shapes they knew so well. The copies hadn't been eliminated. Instead, they had followed them home. The front door boomed shut behind them with a thunderous sound, trapping them inside again. Lightning illuminated outside, revealing the faces of their shadowy attackers as they marched forward menacingly. "You broke the mirror, perhaps," the Guardian's voice echoed, heavy with malice. "But you cannot escape yourselves." As the duplicates advanced, Aza saw the ghastly truth. The curse wasn't bound to the mirror, it was bound to them. And now, it had arrived home. The front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside once more. Lightning illuminated the faces of their dark pursuers outside, revealing the distorted features of each duplicate. They all shared an uncanny resemblance to their original counterparts, but their features were twisted, eyes glowing like hot coals, mouths contorted into sickening grins that stretched too far. Aiza's heart thudded against her chest as she gazed at her own image in the biggest piece of the broken mirror. It wasn't just imitating her actions anymore, it was taunting her. Its lips twisted into a wicked grin, and its voice spoke right into her mind. "You thought you could break me? I am part of you now." Before she had time to react, the Guardian towered above them, its skeletal body stretching long, serrated shadows through the room. "Your futile struggle is humorous," it sneered, its voice rumbling like thunder rolling through the distance. "You can't avoid what you are now." Imam advanced, wielding his knife, though weariness furrowed his face. "We're not afraid of you anymore," the Guardian chuckled. a hearty, rumbling laugh that rattled the very foundations of the home. Daring words from one who holds on to denial. Observe your surroundings. You bear my curse in your veins. With every breath you breathe, you nourish it. With every beat of your heart, you make it stronger. As if to confirm its assertion, the copies charged forward, their actions in unison and unnervingly smooth. They were quicker than before, their claws slicing through the air with chilling accuracy. The twins struggled to fend them off, but exhaustion dulled their reflexes, leaving them exposed. "We can't maintain this," Mubashir yelled, barely avoiding a blow from his copy. "They're too powerful." "They're us," Isa shouted back, her voice slicing through the bedlam. "That's why they're so persistent. They know our vulnerabilities better than us." Her words resonated. Salma nodded darkly, taking a shard from the shattered mirror and using it to deflect an attack that had been launched at Huda. "Then we fight smarter, not stronger. Turn their expertise against them." The claustrophobic tension within the house grew stronger, as if the walls themselves were alive and living on their terror. Each groan of the twisted wooden beams was a step, each dance of candlelight a monstrous shadow that appeared almost animate. The whispers crept back, louder and more urgent, twisting through their brains like poison ivy. "You cannot escape. You belong to us. Join us." Every voice had a different tone, some begging, others goading, but all had the same purpose: to shatter their determination. The air thickened, weighing upon them like an unseen burden. Even the slight heat emanating from the orb did little to drive away the crushing fear. Huda hugged Javaria close, her little sister's feverish form shaking wildly in her arms. "We can't stay here," she breathed, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's consuming us." "She's correct," Hisham agreed, nervously pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "It thrives on our fear. The longer we stay, the more powerful it gets." "But where do we go?" Aqib insisted, knuckles clenched around his blade's hilt. "In every direction, more mirrors, and more of those creatures." No one could answer before the ground itself convulsed under their feet. The floor cracked and split, opening up a great gaping chasm lined with squirming shadows. From the depths emerged the Guardian, bigger and more monstrous than before. Its bony structure towered over them, its empty eyes blazing with anger. "You have the temerity to disobey me?" it thundered, its voice causing the very foundations of the hall to shake. "I am the guardian of this world. Without me, you would not be alive." Sufyan advanced, holding one of his defensive symbols. "You're mistaken. We were alive before you brought us here, and will be alive after you're dead." The Guardian chuckled, a loud, rumbly laugh that rumbled like thunder. "Dumb mortal, your life doesn't matter. You are only pawns in a game much bigger than you can understand." With a flick of its clawed hand, the Guardian called forth a burst of energy that knocked the siblings across the room. They slammed into the wall, their weapons clattering beyond their reach. By the time they could get up, the duplicates had them pinned to the ground. "You will not succeed," the Guardian taunted, advancing. "Your defiance is useless." But Aiza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. "No," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors." The orb burst into shining light, filling the hall with gold. The duplicates shrieked as their bodies dissolved, broken down into threads of smoke that vanished into nothing. The Guardian stumbled backward, covering its eyes from the radiance. "Whatever have you done?" it thundered, its voice full of alarm. "I've removed your curse," Aiza said, straightening up despite her wounds. And I'm leaving for home with my family. The illumination grew stronger, covering the entire hall in an unearthly brilliance. The mirrors all exploded together, their pieces evaporating into clumps of light that circled the children like a vortex. For one frozen instant, everything was silent. The whispers, the snarls, the storm, all stopped by an otherworldly buzz that vibrated through their very core. As the light diminished, they stood in the foyer of their family home. The hexed mirror shattered on the ground, its glass cracked irretrievably. Relief swept over them, tainted with incredulity. They had lived. But as they breathed, Aza saw something unsettling. Her image in the broken pieces of the mirror did not synchronize with her movements. Rather, it smiled weakly, its lips twisting upward into a haughty sneer. "Did we ever get away?" she whispered, her words almost inaudible. No one had time to respond, for the house lurched in a violent motion. In the corners of the space, the shadows converged, forming recognizable shapes. The copies hadn't been killed, they had trailed after them. Aza's heart fell as understanding dawned on her. The ritual had not worked, not entirely. Although the physical form of the curse had been diminished, its nature was still bound to them. Every sibling carried a piece of the mirror's darkness within themselves, a shard of the curse that would not release. "This isn't over," she whispered, a quiver in her voice due to fear as well as resolve. "The curse isn't attached to the mirror, it's attached to us. That's why the duplicates keep showing up." Salma furrowed her brows, frowning. "So what do we do? How do we break the link?" Hisham thumbed through the ancient book, his hands trembling as he hunted for solutions. There's another course of action, a last ritual. But it's risky, much riskier than the first." "Type of danger?" Imam demanded sternly, his tone laced with desperation. "It takes combining with the orb," Hisham said, his voice serious. "Whoever does the ritual will tap into its entire power, basically become a vehicle for its energy. If it works, it will cleanse the curse completely. But at what price?" "At what price?" Aza asked, her gut twisting. "The one doing the ritual might not live," Hisham reluctantly admitted. "Their soul might be destroyed in the process." Silence fell over the group, heavy and suffocating. Everyone exchanged uneasy glances, the implications sinking in slowly. Sacrifice wasn't just a word here, it was a death sentence. "No," Imam said immediately, stepping in front of Aiza protectively. "You're not doing this alone." "She's right," Salma added, her tone firm but laced with concern. "If anyone should take the risk, it's me. I'm the oldest. I've lived longer than any of you." "And I'm the strongest," Mubashir argued, flexing his arms defiantly. "If anyone can handle it, it's me." "You're all missing the point," Aza interrupted, raising her voice enough to silence them. "This isn't about strength or age, it's about responsibility. The mirror called me. It chose me. If anyone has a chance of controlling the ritual, it's me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. No one dared argue further, though the pain in their eyes spoke volumes. They didn't want to lose her, but they also couldn't deny the logic of her reasoning. "Fine," Salma said finally, her voice strained with emotion. "But we're doing this together, every step of the way." Hisham nodded, referring to the book again. "The ritual needs a circle of protection, which is drawn with symbols from the energy of the orb. When activated, it will form a shield between the curse and the rest of us. Within the circle, Aiza will chant the incantation while concentrating on the power of the orb." "What if it doesn't work?" Fahim asked anxiously, tightening his prayer beads. "Then we're all dead," Hisham replied bluntly. "But if it does, the curse will be destroyed, and Aiza will become its anchor." The seriousness of the situation fell over them like a pall. Each brother prepared in silence, collecting whatever equipment they could find to strengthen the ritual circle. Sufyan drafted the protective symbols onto pieces of paper, while Aqib and Imam cooperated to sweep trash out of the middle of the foyer. As they readied, Aiza knelt alongside the pedestal that held the orb, its pale light pulsing in rhythm. She laid hands on its surface, and she could feel the warmth spreading through her skin. Visions erupted in her mind once more. Images of how the mirror came to be made, how it was corrupted, and how the many souls had been devoured by it. Among them, she saw herself, standing in front of the artifact, her reflection twisted beyond recognition. Whatever happens, she murmured to herself, her voice shaking, I won't let it win. As they completed the drawing of the circle, the house shook with tremendous force, knocking everyone off their feet. The Guardian stepped out of the darkness, bigger and more monstrous than ever. Its bony skeleton towered above them, its empty eyes blazing with rage. You dare challenge me? It roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the house. I am eternal. Your pitiful rituals mean nothing. Sufyan stepped forward, clutching one of his protective symbols. You're wrong. This ends now. With a flick of its clawed hand, the Guardian called a burst of energy that knocked the siblings off their feet. They crashed to the ground, their weapons flying from their hands. Before they could scramble to their feet, the duplicates moved in, holding them down. You won't win, the Guardian taunted, advancing closer. Your rebellion is pointless. But Aiza refused to give up. Summoning every ounce of strength, she crawled toward the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the orb. The moment she touched it, a surge of warmth flooded her body, banishing the cold that had plagued her since entering the shadow world. No, she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. You're wrong. We're not pawns. We're survivors. The orb blazed brightly, illuminating the hall in golden light. The copies shrieked as their bodies dissolved, dissolving into wisps of smoke that vanished into thin air. The Guardian stumbled backward, covering its eyes from the radiance. What have you done? It roared, its voice filled with desperation. I've broken your curse, Aiza said, standing firm despite her wounds. And I'm taking my family home. The light grew stronger, illuminating the entire hall in brilliant light. The mirrors broke simultaneously, their pieces disintegrating into threads of light that circled the twins like a tornado. For a fleeting instant, all was still. The whispers, the growls, the thunder, all swallowed by an otherworldly hum that vibrated in the depths of their being. When the light dissipated, they discovered themselves in the foyer of their family home. The haunted mirror was broken into pieces on the ground, its surface cracked irrevocably. Relief hit them, interspersed with incredulity. They had emerged unscathed. But while they were breathing in relief, Aiza detected something unsettling. Her image within the shards of the mirror was not in accordance with her motion. Rather, it smiled dimly, the lips curling into a suggestive smirk. Did we really escape? She whispered, her voice hardly audible. Before anyone had a chance to respond, the house rattled violently. Shadows emerging from the periphery of the room started to form, coalescing into recognizable shapes. The duplicates had not been eliminated. They had been pursued back with them. The front door slammed shut with a thundering crash, imprisoning them in once more. A blinding flash of lightning outside lit up the faces of their shadowy pursuers as they moved menacingly forward. You might have shattered the mirror, the Guardian's voice whispered, full of venom, but you cannot escape yourselves. As the clones approached, Aiza understood the terrible truth. The curse was not bound to the mirror. It was bound to them. And it had followed them home. In the dramatic peak of the tale, Aiza enters completely into the circle, her hands clasped tightly around the orb. When she starts the incantation, her voice rings with authority, each word releasing a flood of golden light that engulfs the room. The Guardian screams in pain, its body dissolving like smoke in a gust of wind. The copies disappear into thin air, their evil presence eliminated, but at a staggering cost. As the ritual comes to an end, Isa collapses, her body limp, but her spirit unbroken. Though weakened by the physical toll, she lives, having cut the curse's grip on her family. The house quietens, the heavy atmosphere dissipating like a sheet. As morning breaks, sunlight pours through the windows for the first time in years. The brothers face it, bruised but living, swearing never to forget the atrocities they suffered or the bond that rescued them. Did you survive the horrors of Mirror of Shadows? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, like, and comment for more chilling stories that will leave you wondering what happens in the dark. Don't forget to tell this tale to friends, if you dare.